Assalamu alaikum, guys. Welcome back to another episode of ChaiVersations with MMAC. I will be your host today, Suferah. For those of you that don't know me, I am a senior now at George Mason University, studying both psychology and biology. And I am joined today by my dear friend, Edie. Edie, why don't you go and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name's Itiola. I'm also a senior at George Mason University now. I've been involved in activism for a couple of years now. It actually just started on accident. I was at Nova at the community college, and I just went to a Young Democrats meeting. And this woman was saying that they're hiring campus organizers. I'm like, that sounds cool. Like, I'll try it. And I've been doing it ever since, and it's been about three years now. I've always been pretty liberal. I've gone more to the left in my recent years. And I think that gave me a really, really good insight on race in America, because before I really got into organizing or really just doing anything political on a larger scale, I had this idea that racism just didn't really exist in the Democratic Party, as funny as that sounds. So when I got into my organizing role, I faced racism and discrimination on my own side, which kind of just took me for a spin. I was like, this is crazy. I found that being a Black woman in some kind of position of power, it made people uncomfortable. People didn't listen to me as much as they should have. People said they cared about my opinion because I'm a minority woman, but they really weren't listening to what I was saying. They were like, I was challenging some kind of status quo in place. It was always a problem. Oftentimes, I would say something and my white counterpart would say the same thing, and they listened to them instead. So a lot of these incidences allowed me to see that the Democratic Party, liberal organizations, liberal movements still need to do so much more work in being more inclusive of those they claim to want to defend and serve and embody.
Yeah, I think you brought up some great points. I know MMAC is very honored to have you and to provide a platform for your insight on what we will be talking about today. As everyone will already know from the title, today we are talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, along with the recent and tragic death of George Floyd, among other Black Americans. And I should preface that what's going to be talked about today is going to be coming from our own opinions. However, I feel like when that's said, people will take it with a grain of salt. I am in no way encouraging that. In fact, I'm encouraging myself, along with everyone else listening to the podcast today, to really listen closely and carefully to what's shared and what's being spoken about, and for them to share this episode with their own family and friends. And if it hasn't already started, to have this discussion, because there's so much that needs to be talked about, and there's so much change that needs to be brought about. And what's happening in America today, I truly believe will be instrumental for a great change for our Black brothers and sisters across the country, inshallah. So with that being said, why don't we start with the first question. In your opinion, how do you think, if at all, the blackout posts that have been posted recently, where it's just the black screen along with the hashtag, may be counterproductive? And do you think that tech companies should be taking any sort of other action with what's happening across the country?
In terms of the blackout posts, I think they're counterproductive if there's no information being used or supported with it. I feel like for some, it seemed like an obligation to, because everyone else who they were following were doing it, or they saw celebrities doing it or companies doing it, and it felt like more of an obligation instead of really trying to understand the meaning behind it. I feel like people just blindly did it without taking much consideration into being kind of introspective and understanding why, or resources, or links, or protests to attend, or whatever other the reasoning behind it wasn't taken into consideration often. So I feel like it's counterproductive. It has been counterproductive for many people, not all, but many people who saw it as an obligation because they didn't want to be seen as racist, or not using their privilege correctly, or not being educated. But the reality is, posting a black screen doesn't change any of that. If you're not using your platform to really start a conversation, none of those perceived notions change. And I feel like people are so worried about how they are perceived by others instead of trying to actually gain the knowledge to change that perception. We want to gloss over it with the blackout posts. If you're actually taking this time to use your platform in a way that's informative for yourself and others, along with the blackout post, it's great. But I've seen far too many posts that are just BLM, which people told people not to do, or Blackout Tuesday, or a heart, or an emoji, and that's it. To say, hey, I did it, that's very counterproductive.
Yeah, it almost seems like, whether intentionally or unintentionally, almost performative, because obviously, like you had said, people could be posting links and actual resources. And I think what you said is absolutely correct. And along the lines of technology and posting online, what role do you think that misinformation or hate speech has on the effect of protesters and activists right now?
It has a huge impact because these protests are being largely organized online with social media and retweeting and Instagram and all of these other platforms. That's really how the message is being sent around. And that's very powerful. Social media and technology can be a very powerful thing. However, because there's so few checks, people don't have to authorize information before spreading the word. There's been places that are simply fake protests where law enforcement's actually using these fake protests as ways to catch people. Just a lot of misinformation going around, and that can disillude people and persuade them not to attend or not to be active in these protests. It can be very dangerous. And a lot of the people who are protesting have faced discrimination themselves. So when there's hate speech or threats, I mean, that can really stop someone in their tracks. It can really make them think, this could be me next. What if I get harmed in the protests? I'm already facing discrimination and someone's throwing out hate speech and threats. That can be an actual imminent threat. So I'm sure that some protesters are taking that into consideration when they see these things online.
Yeah, absolutely. And, along with the misinformation and hate speech that protesters and activists have to deal with, they also have to, deal with these counter movements that have come about in response to Black Lives Matter, almost as a rebuttal. For example, the All Lives Matter movement or the Blue Lives Matter movement. Why do you think that is? And are these dangerous sentiments?
There are so many reasons why that is. On the surface, I don't think they're necessarily dangerous. But when you actually research and look deeper, it is very dangerous because Americans, especially for the Blue Lives Matter movement, a lot of white Americans have a lot of faith in these institutions. They have faith in law enforcement. They have faith in the structure of the government. They have faith in the institutions that they participate in on a regular basis, i.e. education or policing or jailing or whatever. So when people are getting killed, your fellow Americans are getting slaughtered by law enforcement, and the rebuttal is Blue Lives Matter, it sets a really dangerous precedent. Like, we call other countries totalitarian. To have a major sect of the population seeing people being killed for no reason, apart from how they look, or the city they live in, or the neighborhood they live in, that's pretty crazy to me. It's like a very totalitarian thing to defend an institution that has been known since its founding to imprison people, kill people,
Yeah.
surveil people for no reason. So it's very alarming when you really look into it. Some people might think they're just well-meaning people who don't know, and that's true, but the reality is so much scarier. With All Lives Matter, you're basically ignoring millions upon millions of people who are presenting you with an issue that has plagued America since its founding, and ignoring it because you can. And that's also very dangerous. It really shows how divided America is and how people are really living in alternate realities.
Yeah, I
America
think
is,
it.
yeah.
Sorry, did I cut you off?
Yeah, it's okay. No,
No.
America, since its founding, has been about, uniting as a country, uniting as one. But the
Yeah.
reality is that we're so far from it. People are literally living in different worlds. When you live in a different zip code, you're facing a completely different reality. So it's really interesting because I feel like these counter movements are really, they're really giving voice to the fact that how different American lives are, dependent on your race, your class, your religion,
Absolutely.
your neighborhood. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's interesting that you brought up sort of the point of view that, this issue has existed since America's creation. And then there are certain people who are living in this alternate reality. And it's almost as if in that alternate reality, it's because, as it seems like we were taught in school, that, racism is over and the civil rights movement is something of the past. And so it seems like that may have played into the reason why certain people are living in this quote unquote, alternate reality. But evidently it doesn't seem like this is still something of the past. It seems as though America is still struggling with this, and that Black Americans are still struggling with this. And do you think there are other sorts of policies or institutions that are letting this threatening rhetoric continue to exist?
For sure. I mean, for institutions to be successful at what they do, people have to have faith in them, right? If you teach people that America is incredibly flawed, systemic racism is found in all of our institutions, including classrooms, people won't have faith in that institution can crumble. So by saying that, we dealt with we made these major strides, and African Americans aren't really facing that much racism or systemic racism or any of the policies that, we talk about in school, you are validating the institution. You're giving the institution a premise to survive, because you're not attacking the institution. So these things that we have heard from various institutions, it allows the institution to thrive. It allows the institution to get by without any major referendums because people have faith in them and they're not looking to correct them. So yeah, when we hear this rhetoric as we're growing up, and it might not be direct, it could be subliminal, so it's easy to ignore or just accept. The institution can survive with few changes. When people start attacking the institution itself of American education or American policing or the jailing system, the prison complex in America, then the institution's at risk. So yeah, our institutions do uphold these notions. They do feed us these sentiments, and we take them as facts. So when we do that, they're fine. The institutions still exist. They still do what they do, and people come to accept it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like racism is a word that's thrown around here, and I want to make sure, is that the right word? Do you think it encompasses or defines the complete oppression and disparity of our current conversation? Like, is that how you would define it? Or is it something more?
Racism is a part of it, a part of the conversation we're having.
Yeah.
Systemic racism is a part of the conversation we're having. And then class is also something I would actually include in this conversation. It's almost as vital to the conversation as race. I was just talking to a friend earlier about this, how Black Americans in particular can face a completely different reality in regards to class. If you're an upper middle class African American person compared to a lower middle class or a poorer African American, you're facing two different realities. Although racism will likely plague both lives, it will do it in a completely different fashion. If you're wealthy and you're living in a wealthier neighborhood with less African Americans, you're likely to see less police presence because minority communities are over-policed. So that's one aspect that that you would likely avoid more often. So these are things that we have to think about. Like, communities that are vulnerable to these systems and institutions are those who are poor, or the plagues of these institutions are those that are poor. And I'm not saying that like wealthy African Americans don't face racism and other discrimination. No, it's simply a different type, and there are different Black experiences that we should address. It's not one monolith of experiences. Class has a major effect on American institutions and racism.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really important insight when we are talking about an issue like this, that it is, like you said, not just monofacet, and there are many things that should be taken into consideration, definitely. And right now in particular, sort of the driving force is the police brutality that Black Americans face across the country. So do you think that police reform alone can change the course of this issue, or do you believe other actions need to be taken? What is that missing link in our cities and states that's creating such apathy between policing and community building?
That's a really interesting question because there's so many answers. The first portion of your question, I don't think that police reform will do enough, because I feel like policing in America has just been so plagued over hundreds of years. Policing stemming, the modern American policing system stemming from Black code laws in the South. At its root, it was plagued. The laws that they uphold are plagued. They are masked with over policing and identifying and imprisoning people because of their race or the neighborhood they live in. New York just got rid of laws that were accepting profiling to lower crime, which wasn't the case. So no, I don't think police reform is enough because policing has just been so plagued. I think you need a completely different system in place, which is very unlikely. But to truly deal with the American prison system, you have to completely reform, and not even reform it. You have to create a new policing system. It's just too plagued.
And then the missing link in the cities and states, like, what do you believe is creating such that apathy between the police and the community?
Well, the first part of it is they likely have no interest in that neighborhood at all. The man who killed George Floyd lived half an hour away from that neighborhood. These cops, these police officers don't live in those neighborhoods. They don't have any connection to the people living there. They view people, or some of them view people as statistics because they have no relation to them. And that's when you see these things happen, when you view people as things to imprison or things to harm because you feel like they're going to harm you. Mm-hmm. These things occur all the time. When you dehumanize Black people in your uniform, these things are bound to happen. When you have no connection to people to begin with, or try not to, it's very easy to dehumanize them. As far as city governments and state governments, it's very unpopular, whether if you're a Democrat or Republican, to really address these problems head on in a fashion that would actually create a lot of change. Because the immediate pushback is, how dare you disrespect our officers? Because Americans have such faith, or white Americans have such faith in these systems. So it's very unpopular, regardless of your political party, which I think is really bad, because you're getting in the way of some serious reforms and serious changes because of how people view, or white people view, the police in this country.
Yeah, I think, that's great insight. And you mentioned like the state governments and, these cities. Along with that, their responses from the state governments and the federal governments of what's happening. Do you think the way these institutions are responding to the protests are a part of the problem? Do you think there's anything that could be done better?
It depends. At first, it was kind of accepting. And then as soon as the looting began, it was immediate, like, National Guard, we need help from Trump. The same rhetoric we've seen decade after decade after decade. So when state governments respond in such a fashion, you're amping people up. You're bringing outsiders into your state. You're riling people up. These people, National Guard and police officers, have used excessive force in many situations across the country that have been documented. So, no, when the National Guard is brought out and the riot gear comes out from the police officers, you're not helping the situation, because you're not dealing with the issue. Right? You're not talking to community leaders. You're not trying to find the root of the pain and the oppressive systems in place. You're simply putting a Band-Aid over it to calm people down. So as long as state governments continue to act in this manner, these things will continue to happen. You're giving the cops the pass. And you're upsetting the protesters who live in your state or live in your city or whatever. So you're putting a Band-Aid, and it's going to happen again and again and again, because these state officials, Republican or Democrat, I don't think they have really taken the time to actually talk to community leaders and express understanding. You're treating your city like it's a war zone. Like, these people don't vote you in. Like, these citizens they're not citizens. They're not as American as you. And there are things that need to be controlled and neutralized. And that rhetoric is very dangerous. And as long as we continue to see that, the more police brutality will happen, and the more you'll see these protests and these riots.
Yeah, I think that you brought up a lot of great points there. And it is important to recognize that I believe at least any changes within police departments are all held at like the power of the local government. So in this case, local elections would be extremely important for this issue. And since we are coming to an end here, I wanted to give you the opportunity to give a call to action to our listeners today, or any final thoughts before we end here.
Sure. Because it's like a faith-based podcast, I saw a great thread from a Somali American Muslim woman who was speaking about her experiences as a Black Muslim woman in her own community. Some resentment from family members, appreciation for lighter Muslim people, these kind of small microaggressions, but when they're all together, it can really create a big effect. So I'm calling on all communities, including the Black community, to look within, to address these racial issues in your communities, to address colorism in your own communities, because it really does plague several communities. It's not just white people. It's a lot of minorities. Speaking from experience as a Nigerian American woman, like colorism is a huge problem in Nigeria. So I really want people to take this time, we're in quarantine, to really do some introspection, to really look within yourself, your communities, see what you can do to make a change, whether that be with yourself, with friends, with your group of people who are around you. Take this time to really listen and learn. I feel like people are just talking over each other a lot. It's okay to just stop, listen, and learn.
Absolutely. And it's so important for us to do that. And I'm glad that you did bring up, the Black Muslim experience as well, because that is a huge issue. And, now I am speaking to our listeners and, Muslims across the nation, that at the core of our faith, like, God did make everyone equal. And we are taught by our prophet, peace be upon him, that racism has no place in Islam. And I think we need to remind ourselves of that and do so much better and have these conversations. Along with that, we will be posting links to donations, petitions to sign for the protests that are happening, not only for George Floyd, but for Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. We will also be posting information on how to get in contact with your local representatives. I believe also email templates to reach out and, demand change. So thank you to everyone who has tuned in. Thank you, Edie, for spending your night with me and sharing so much great insight. I definitely did learn a lot today.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
So thanks, guys. Bye.